Hello, in this presentation we'll be going over biosand filters as part of the Humanitarian Library webinar series done by the Harvard Seas Engineers Without Borders chapter. My name is Anthony Bogachev. I'm a junior studying bioengineering at Harvard.
My name is James Niffenegger. I'm a mechanical engineering student, junior at Harvard. For our presentation, we'll be splitting it up into three different parts: an overview of biosand filtration systems, discussion about their functionality, and then finally discussion about the sustainability of these projects, essentially how to ensure their success in the long term. So first, talking about an overview of the project. So it's important to signify why biosand filters are important. So they can provide a variety of different health benefits, significantly removing pathogens and improving the health of individuals who use it. They're very adaptable, so they can use resources from a variety of different areas, which are generally available. There is a significant need for this kind of technology in the locations where we're currently doing projects, which would be Los Sanchez in the Dominican Republic and Mukatani in Tanzania. There's a widespread demand for potable water in those areas. These systems are also very popular, where over 650,000 filters exist in more than 70 countries and benefit over 44 million people. So specifically in the areas we're doing projects in Los Sanchez, about 2/3 of the community do not have access to potable water. That amounts to around 300 people. While the wealthier areas do have access to central piping, some of them also do have biosand filtration systems, so we know that this is an option that has been considered in this community already. In terms of Mukatani, the only potable water available is located at the faraway borehole, which makes it pretty inaccessible to students and teachers who need to spend a lot of time in the community during the day for classes. And there are no filtration systems in the community. The rainwater catchment systems that are currently being worked on at this time will alleviate the need. However, this water will still not be filtered, so it's important to find a filtration system that could do this. So giving a general overview of biosand filtration systems, they can improve water quality, such as by killing pathogens through predation of microorganisms in their biological layer, or schmusteke. Contaminants and pathogens can also get trapped in sand layers due to small spaces in the grains of sand. And these systems are actually very effective. They're able to remove up to 99% of bacteria and 85% of viruses. And they're also able to reduce the incidence of diarrheal disease from about 50 to 75%. These are really great because they're low cost and high impact. They can use local materials, and they generally cost under $100. When looking at the long term, these things can serve up to 7 people and take about 10 years before they need to be fully replaced. However, a drawback of these systems includes constant resupplying of water to maintain the biological layer. They don't remove all chemicals in the water or viruses, and they require technical expertise to build. When comparing a biosand filtration system to other methods, we can see that it's very effective at getting rid of pathogens such as bacteria and protozoa. However, it's much less effective at dealing with chemical contaminants such as salts and fluoride. Chlorination is very effective at getting rid of bacteria. However, it's not as effective when dealing with viruses, and it has a significant problem with taste, where many individuals who drink chlorinated water don't like the taste and will sometimes prefer not to even chlorinate their water on account of that. Membrane filtration systems are very effective at dealing with various contaminants. However, they require the most frequent maintenance. UV systems, on the other hand, are also very effective against microorganisms. However, these systems require electricity and are not able to get rid of physical contaminants or reduce turbidity. Ceramic filters are very effective against most contaminants. However, they have a very slow filtration rate, and they need to be replaced every 1 to 2 years. In terms of filtration speeds, biosand filters have a moderate filtration speed in that they can flow out about 25 to 75 liters per hour. UV systems, however, are the fastest filters available, where they can do about 60 to 180 liters per hour. Ceramic filters have the slowest flow rate of 1 to 2 liters per hour. Chlorination depends on the volume, and membrane filtration depends on the pressure. However, the flow rate can be comparable to UV.
All right, so now we'll talk about the functionality of biosand filters. So just as a quick overview, there are many components to a biosand filter. It starts at the very top where the lid covers up the biosand filter from external contaminants. The diffuser is effectively a perforated plate that prevents incoming water that's placed in the biosand filter from disturbing the layers below and distributes the water across the entire surface area of the biosand filter. The bio layer, or Schmutzdecke, then has the predatory bacteria that attacks the pathogens, and what's not caught in the biolayer and the other contaminants are then passed through the filtration sand, where almost all of it gets trapped. The separation and drainage gravel then facilitate the water flow, and it ultimately comes out of the outlet tube and is either stored in a safe water storage container or simply has a tap on the end. So the general process then is that dirty water is poured in, it hits the diffuser plate, it trickles through onto the Schmutzdecke biolayer through the diffuser plate, it rests there, and ultimately it passes through the sand column, and then it goes up and out the system. Now, a little bit more specifically about the biological layer, or Schmutzdecke. So it contains food chains of ciliated protozoa, which are free living bacteria, amoebae, crustaceans, algae, and other microorganisms. Typically, the Schmutzdecke will form in about 1 to 2 weeks, but ultimately it could take up to 30 days to fully mature. And treatment efficiency, unfortunately, is limited during the first 2 weeks, but it's difficult to predict exactly how quickly it will develop. The most difficult part is that it's not visible, so there's no way to definitively know when the Schmutzdecke is fully developed unless you have proper water testing equipment, which in many cases the local community will not have. So ideally, Schmutzdecke development time, and that varies based on the local water conditions, will be tested and established whenever those filters are implemented, and so then the community will know roughly the time that it takes based on those local conditions for the future. And then the sand layer, more specifically, is genuinely between 20 to 30 inches thick. The exact thickness will vary based on your container size. Grain size has been found to not have a particularly large effect on filtration capability, but a rough guideline is 0.35 millimeters in diameter for grain size. And ultimately, you want to make sure that that sand is properly cleaned and filtered before it's actually placed in the biosand filter so that new contaminants aren't introduced into the system. So then for the construction process, the first step is determining what container you have. In general, biosand filters are made out of a plastic drum, such as the 55-gallon one depicted in this picture, or a concrete column built specifically for the biosand filter. Then local sand and gravel needs to be obtained, ideally from a quarry so that it's not contaminated. For example, sand often available in a riverbed will often have biological or other contaminants. Then the sand and gravel should be purified. Now this is time and water intensive, but it is very important to sift through it and to flush it off with many layers, with many passes of water so that you can ensure that it's relatively pathogen free. Then you need to build plumbing to enable water to flow from the bottom of the unit to the top. You want to ensure that the spout is slightly above the standing water level so that you can ensure that there's always that water covering the Schmutzdecke to ensure that the bacteria have the ability to diffuse oxygen through the water but never get dehydrated. And then you want to create the diffusion plate at the top, which you can effectively just cut holes into a special plate or even just use the lid of the tank that you're using. And then finally you want to place the system in an accessible location, and ideally you would have built it in the proper location right away, simply because it does get heavy with the sand and gravel and then water in the system.
All right, moving on to the last portion of our presentation, which is looking at sustainability of the project, essentially ensuring the long-term success of using a biosand filter. So first, talking about monitoring and maintenance, it's very important to monitor the biological layer in order to ensure that the water level remains around 5 centimeters. The tolerance can be, it's not very well defined, but it's around plus or minus 1 centimeter, so 4 to 6 centimeters should be all right. There's a risk of bacteria dying from dehydration if the levels of the water are too low, or lack of oxygen if the levels are too high, where the gas does not reach the surface of the sand underneath the water, which can prevent bacteria from growing on that surface. As in terms of need of maintenance, the pore spaces between sand and gravel can get clogged by contaminants or growth of microorganisms and can reduce the flow rate over time. The filter will still function at these low flow rates, but people might stop using it. Continuing on with monitoring and maintenance. So every 4 to 6 months, it will be important to do a swirl and dump where the spout of the system is blocked and the diffuser plate is removed. From there, water will be stirred by hand, and then water will be poured out carefully to dislodge the dirt in the top layer without damaging the biological layer, or Schmuckstärke. Every 10 years, it will be important to do a full replacement of the system where all the sand and gravel is removed and replaced with fresh and sifted layers. However, this will destroy the Schmuckstärke biological layer, which will then regrow. And it's important to consistently add water at least once every 2 days to maintain the water level above the Schmuckstärke. And then it's ideal to scrub the diffuser plate, lid, and outlet with water in order to maintain the flow rate. So it's important to realize that even if we conclude that biosand filters are beneficial for our communities, we still need the community's approval before we go ahead with the project. In Los Sanchez, it would be a good idea to conduct a survey of the homes without biosand filters to determine if they are the preferred means of filtration. It would also be good to talk to individuals who have these systems already to see what they think of them. In Mukutani, it would be good to show images and plans to the headmaster and the teachers and determine if they would be willing to maintain a pilot or test biosand filter with the possibility of creating more in the future. This pilot system would essentially be useful to figure out whether or not the community will use this system and if they would like to continue using it. In terms of community integration, in Los Sanchez, we could build biosand filter units in areas that are farthest away from central piping and tap stands that also happen to be the poorest. It would also be really good to teach family groups how to properly use these systems and maintain them and appoint people who are essentially in charge of maintenance. In Mukutani, it would be good to build biosand filter units by each primary building in the school complex, and then to teach the headmaster and teachers how to properly use and maintain the system, and suggest that students could also share the responsibility.
All right, so now we figured it would be useful to go through a biosand filter case study to move from the theory and to show how it's actually been used in practice. So we decided to look at the famous example of Bonao in the Dominican Republic. There are a few studies conducted on this town, and ultimately 328 households were interviewed. Between the 2 points of being interviewed, 90% of biosand filters were still in use after 1 year. And according to many fecal indicator bacteria tests done on biosand filter households over that time, the fecal indicator bacteria were reduced between 84 and 88%. And between households that used BSFs and non-BSF households, the odds of diarrheal disease were just 0.39. So what are then the possible concrete next steps that our chapter can take in the next 3 months to utilize BSFs? And so The ultimate plan is to create one at Harvard and conduct water quality tests to demonstrate its effectiveness or perhaps the lack thereof. And we'd like to test it on rainwater, and then for the ultimate test, Charles River water, which is notoriously dirty. And then if it's shown to be effective, the next step would be to build one in the community of Muktani and to leave the headmaster of that school complex with a survey form to track usage and maintenance frequency. And we'd like to periodically call the community, which we already do, but specifically to follow up on the success and progress with the Biosand filter. And hopefully, if we see that it's being regularly used and maintained, we could build more and leave the community with building instructions so that the model could be scaled further. And so finally, let's conclude with the key takeaways of Biosand filters. So first of all, they're cheap and effective. Although in our communities, they're already available in Los Sanchez, both Muktani and Los Sanchez could benefit from increased proliferation of Biosand filters. And within them, the biological layer of the Schmidt-Stecke is the most difficult to maintain because it requires constant water addition, and the water needs to be held at a constant level. But that allows them to provide an advantage that other filtration methods do not have. And finally, access to clean water can help with a variety of health and education metrics. And so building these systems in communities that need them is incredibly important. All right, and here are all of our various citations. Thank you very much for following along with this webinar. Please feel free to peruse our sources for more information, and we hope that this is helpful for your future projects. Thank you.